So this episode, we already had discussions before coming here. We already had the discussion, just you and me, or you and I, whatever the English term is. And it's more about love and healing and, well, for me personally, fatherhood, because we really recently just got, well, not really got out, we're still in June. I think by the time this is released, it still would be June. So we recently just got out of Father's Day. And June is Men's Health Month, and health I try to embody or incorporate fitness, health and lifestyle and all that stuff into this particular podcast. So I think this makes for a good, not necessarily segue, because I think it ties into most of the conversation I would have had before, but it's definitely going to be something a bit more emotional, dare I say, but keep me high energy and keep it going. So it's more along the line of relationships. I know that's something that you said you wanted to discuss, and just fatherhood, being a husband, and maybe just growing as a man, right? Before I dive into all that though, I don't have like a full write-up on all the things you do, so I want you to like kind of introduce yourself to the public, to the listeners.
Sure thing. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Thanks for being here.
My name is Floris Vermeulen. I've lived in Barbados for the last 8.5 years.
Yeah.
I'm a Dutchman. I'm from the Netherlands.
Oh, sweet.
But I grew up in many countries, various countries, as I was growing up and also after my studies. We moved here with my work. I work for a large international bank. And then more recently, I've been doing some consulting work on some local investment projects. Unfortunately, our time to Barbados is coming to an end, so it's been a rather emotional last couple of months as we come to terms with the fact that we're leaving this beautiful place and this beautiful community, and heading back to Europe to continue my work there and my career there. I'm married. I have 2 kids. My wife is from Spain, and our boys are 12 and 14.
How does a Dutchman meet a Spanish or Latina lady?
That's a very good question. So, in the old-fashioned way, we actually met in a bar, and my wife Beatrice, she came up to me and started chatting to me. So, thank goodness for that. She introduced herself. She said she saw me there, and she just thought she had to talk to me. And we met up shortly afterwards, and we've been dating, and then got married 2 years after that.
You got married 2 years after you guys met?
Yeah, sorry, engaged 2 years after, and married 3 years after. Yeah.
How long are you married now?
We just celebrated our 17th wedding anniversary.
Oh, wow.
So 20 years together.
That is crazy. That's something you definitely don't hear a lot of.
Sure, I'm sure we're going to talk about it today.
It's like there's a lot of longevity obviously in that. Is it something common where you come from in terms of Dutch and Europe per se? You find that people stay married for a very long time?
So in our group of friends, I would say the majority have stayed married, but we definitely have seen good friends also go through divorces and separations. Some have gone very smoothly, and others have been horrible, like really where the couple ends up just trying to tear each other apart. So we've seen it all. I think maybe because of I'm not sure what the stats are and everything behind it, but the majority of people still are together. Both our parents also stay together on both sides. So I don't know if that's also something that you end up growing up with, and then you end up with a different kind of mental image of what marriage should be like. And then, ultimately, if we get to the core of the issue, it's really about the couple being willing to work through the problems because you have a project together.
There are definitely people on my side of the family that have been married and stay married. I don't think anybody celebrated 17 years. I could be wrong. I stand to be corrected. But growing up, there's definitely been more of split ups and divorces and separations than it has been people staying together, right? So I guess to add to your point, it was like, what was maybe like the glue that kind of like holds that together? Because people go through things, right?
Sure.
People grow up and they grow apart, and maybe they aren't the same way as you started, but to stay together for 17, 20 years, like, you've seen it all, but you probably also experienced it all too.
So I can give my answer will not be structured, but I'll try and cover
that's fine.
A lot of topics. So I mean, I think every couple will basically go through the same thing, very similar phases, and call them growth opportunities or call them crises. But like every couple will go through that, like almost without exception. One of the people that we follow, and like what they've written a lot about marriage counseling. They say marriage is not meant to make you happy. Marriage is a people growing machine. So it's like it forces you to grow as a person and learn about yourself and learn about each other, or you're going to end up separating, basically. Now, I do know some stats. I think one thing when I think about our group of friends is that everyone got married kind of 30 or later. And if you actually look at divorce statistics, everyone's always famously talking about more than 50% of marriages end up in divorce, right? But if you take out the marriages where the people knew each other for like less than a year and got married very quickly, and if you take out the marriages where people got married, say, before the age of 25, then actually the statistics change drastically. So you can see that a lot of influence comes from maybe people being still not mature enough to take on the responsibility of marriage, or they just got very in love, but then maybe it was more of a flash in the pan than like something which was deep and really based on shared values and things like that. So that's one thing I think we need to put into context. I think the other element is what's happening around you. I mean, you mentioned like the racial thing, but I would say it's more about what's happening around you is like what model do you carry subconsciously in the back of your mind? I imagine there's many people that would be like maybe from families that have gone to church, where there's a very different expectation about what marriage means and what it's about, as opposed to maybe someone that has watched a lot of Disney movies and just expects it all to be roses and sunsets and romance, right? Because we're married now, so I'm meant to be happy, right? And maybe if there's been a lot of breakups around you, then it might be also something you say like, well, times are tough, so, let's just split. And I'm not even going to judge, right? Because we can't walk in anyone else's shoes. So I think those factors probably play a role. And I also have to say, imagine me and my wife who went through quite a lot of therapy and marriage counseling. Now that's something you got to pay for, right? Yeah. So there's also, you have to be able in an environment where, first of all, it's an option. And secondly, that you can pay someone to go through those sessions and be guided through that learning process. That for me is priceless, right? It's priceless because it kept us together.
Yeah.
But like that's also got to be something that's available to people. So I think if you put those factors together, I think you get like a rounded picture, on why some people end up staying together and why some people don't. Definitely.
You mentioned maturity as you're discussing it just now. What age were you engaged at?
So I guess 27, 28.
28. So,
or 29. Sorry, I'm 29.
So stats are floating around in terms of the age of cognition, or the age when people actually mature mentally, right? And it's usually around like the 25 year, 26 year mark, or maybe a little later for men, right? Because apparently I think statistics fail me right now, but I think women obviously advance a bit faster in that regard than we do, especially emotionally and stuff like that.
And do we ever really grow up?
Do we ever really grow up? It's just like this constant cycle, just ever evolving, right? But you say that, but a lot of people do get into relationships in that time frame, right? 25 to 28 to 29 to even like early 30s, right? So would you say that around that time you were emotionally mature to actually start something long term?
Well, I think I was hopefully mature enough, right, to make a wise choice.
Right.
And I think probably you have to be in a few relationships, like, to really get to know what is a good match and what you're looking for. I think ultimately when you meet the right person, I would obviously say don't rush into it, but intuitively you'll have a very strong feeling that this person is different, or they have something which you can't really even put your finger on at that time, but it's something that just makes it feel right. Now the trouble is, it doesn't mean that it's a bed of roses afterwards, right? It means that probably, and here we're getting into the healing aspect, probably there's something about that person that is like filling a missing piece in yourself. So, for instance, I'm from the Netherlands. We're very level-headed. We don't talk about our emotions very much. We're just, talk about politics and what's happening, blah, blah, blah. And Beatrice, my wife, used to go crazy at the dinner table going like, you guys don't talk about yourselves. Like, when are you going to talk about what's going on in your lives? And, whereas like the Mediterranean context, she's from Spain, is much more about sharing and what's going on. And like really, especially between groups of friends, like having that kind of bonding and sharing these life experiences together. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is that the level-headedness means that we tend to be very calm. We don't, if there's a crisis, whatever, we don't, we're very, like, we take a rational approach to it. And in the Mediterranean context, people tend to express their emotions more, right? Mm-hmm. So she was probably drawn to the fact that I was this calm person, right? Very steadfast, and also I think she was drawn to me because I was like very sweet and thoughtful, and I was like always doing my best to keep people happy and everything. Whereas I was drawn to her because she had this beautiful light, this expressiveness about her, and that emotional side is something that I was missing in myself, right? So I meet her and I'm like, wow, this girl's different. Wow, I feel amazing. Like, because I think subconsciously we are attracted to something which kind of makes us feel whole, right? So that is a great start, but it doesn't actually solve the underlying issue, which is that as a person, personally, I can't rely on my wife to complete that part of me. That lasts around a couple of years, right? The falling in love phase, right? After that, I got to work on myself, or it's going to become a point of friction.
So before we go into the friction part and the self-assessment, because I was listening to some podcasts recently talking about similar things, and I feel like we can jump into that. You mentioned being fitting a part of the puzzle for you, but you also mentioned like going through some struggles, but not necessarily struggles, but relationships in the past, right? I don't want to get too philosophical or even religious. I try not to go down the path on the podcast because I know people have varying views, and somebody may see marriage as the structure based on the church, as you said, or maybe see it based on something else and you model to suit. But one thing you don't take away is that people do have past experiences before moving into this current experience, right? Not everybody can marry like their childhood sweetheart or whatever. Not everybody does that. So sometimes you go into other relationships. Do you think that for the most part, people tend to not necessarily find somebody that fits the puzzle, but also find something that feels a little familiar? Like,
oh, for sure.
I would give myself as an example. I find a lot of the relationships that I had in the past, not just pre-Jess or whatever, but there was a time, and I think tying back into the stuff that you mentioned, like trying to find myself and trying to find myself in other persons, but also like you find, how to word this, like people attached to hurt, you know what I mean?
I totally know what you mean.
You start to lean in the direction of somebody, not because they're necessarily good for me, but because
it feels familiar.
It feels like a familiar territory.
So I think this is, I totally agree. And what I've understood about it is probably not from your previous relationship, it's probably from your early childhood experiences. So if you grew up with a cold and distant parent, you might be drawn to someone that's cold and distant, not from a place of wisdom, but like you say, from a place of familiarity. And I believe this might be one of the mechanisms how trauma gets passed through generations, in that, I mean, I'm not an expert, but if you went through, say, abuse, you might end up in a situation where you're later in a relationship which is again abusive, again through this subconscious sense of familiarity, and probably because part of your childhood brain, something went in the hard drive that said like, this is what a relationship should be like.
Yeah.
Right? And it could be many things. I mean, that's an extreme example, but it could be that a relationship should be like what do you call it? Like overwhelmingly close, and like it should be smothering, or it should be that you're avoidant, because like that's my personal example. We didn't talk about our emotions in our family. We actually didn't say I love you to our parents. Like they didn't say it to us, we didn't say it to them. We knew they loved us, right? We knew cognitively, but so, and when I reflect on that as a young kid, it's like, so if there was like, it was kind of cold in the house, then what was my default mode as a kid? I'll be like, well, I'll just pull away from emotions and like avoid them, right? And that's been something I've lived with my whole life. And I think that's something that then you come up again if you're in a serious relationship. What you say, what's familiar for me is like, oh, this is getting uncomfortable. I'm just going to go to the other room. I'm going to switch on the TV. I'm going to go and do my sports or whatever. And
just to get away from it, right?
Yeah. And the trouble is, you're not, that's like kind of the comfort zone, exactly what you say, but it's not actually the place of wisdom where you should say like, okay, hang on a minute, this is something we do need to talk about. And that's where Beatrice has been very good for me, because she, like I said, she's much more in touch with her emotions. So she will want to talk about it. And then at the time I feel uncomfortable, but actually it's for the best. And that's where you kind of can learn from each other. And there must be 1,000 factors like this. Like I'm just thinking of a few, but there must be 1,000 factors between, you know, do you get angry? Do you run away? Do you seek reassurance? Do you, are you very strict with your kids? Are you overly permissive? Like these are things that they're so far back in the back of our brains. Like you really got to have like some sort of mirror.
All these things you mentioned, right? Like what parts of your, I guess like your upbringing or your childhood, do you think, or do you recognize it in the way that you like maybe love Bea? Do you see that so many things that you probably would have been going through as a child, as a boy, show up now in the way that you present yourself as a husband to her? Like,
certainly, for better and for worse.
For better,
right? Because this is, I think, how our first kind of crisis moment happened. In that, I grew up like always trying to keep my parents happy, right? Probably seeking approval from them because I wasn't getting a natural kind of warmth or right, that kind of comfort from them. So that's how I go into life. I just keep doing my best, and then eventually I'll earn my love, right? Right, which is, it doesn't make sense, but it's in there, right, in the back of your mind. And then avoiding the difficult conversations because all the emotions, they go under the carpet, right? No, we don't do that. And so I went into the relationship like that, but eventually there was like, it wasn't working anymore because Bea wasn't feeling heard and wasn't feeling seen. She was feeling like emotionally quite lonely, and I had to face up to that. And that's where, this counseling came in so handy, because it was like professionally someone could hold up the mirror to us who was, number one, trained, but secondly, impartial, right? This is very important because when it comes from your partner, if you're dealing with your childhood wounds, you're just gonna get triggered, right? And then you get the trigger responses, which are flight, fight, or freeze. So not the healthy way to respond. And so that definitely came up. And that was where I think we got the first evolution in the relationship where we could have separated because like, oh my word, she's so demanding. This is impossible. It's never enough. Like that was my like people pleaser, just suffering, a little child going like, oh my God, all I want is approval and I'm not getting it, right? Or you grow through it and then, whoa, I managed to level up. I'm now aware that what I was doing was ineffective. What I actually needed to do was spend half an hour with Beatrice, connect with her, hear her, not come up with a solution. No, it's simple stuff in the end, but adapting the autopilot, I guess.
When you when you think about stuff like that, right? It makes you, or it makes us seem. I've been told this before in relationships, in therapy, and just in everyday life. People say to me, "Oh, you're so self-aware, right? Like you seem to have like that part of your emotion intact." One of the critiques that I brought onto the show a few times was that men, especially men in Barbados where I'm from, it seems like a lot of men do things reactive, right? You don't self-assess, or you don't take time to understand like why I'm really feeling this way, right? And it seems to evoke. We had conversations before the cameras turned on about sadness and anger and stuff. You don't tend to see how these emotions really make you feel, not just that you're sad or not just that you're angry or happy. Like there seem to be two modes for men: happy or angry. There's no in between. I can't navigate the space. I just need to get it out, hurt somebody or whatever, and now I feel better, right? Full circle, bringing it back to some stuff that you mentioned, because you came up in a time where you felt trying to please this person, it's not working, you find that you start projecting and you start blaming the other partner for like the way that you feel, and not necessarily dealing with it, because it took you time to realize, hey, this was a traumatic experience for me in my past or in my childhood. But no, having not dealt with it until seeking therapy or whatever, you go into a relationship with a person not understanding how that person receives certain information, and then you find yourself I have found myself pointing a finger at the person, saying, oh well, I feel this way because you did that, or I feel this way because you did me wrong. Not realizing that I don't own the pain or own up to the pain, and then try to understand how that person then reacts to that, so
100%. And I think this is why in a marriage situation it can fall apart so spectacularly.
Yeah.
Because what happens is when we reach the end of our runway when it comes to our learned behaviors, the first person that's in front of you is your partner, right? The first person that is triggering all this old stuff is your partner. And I think that happens all the time. This is pretty much, I think that's the definition, what you just described is like the definition of a long-term committed relationship, is in then that person is going to be able to touch those parts of you which are the most painful, and the most natural thing for a person to do is say, you did this, right? I feel like this, it must be your fault. And my word, it's like, it's the next level self-awareness, what you say, to be able to say, and this I think will make or break a relationship. And I'm not saying it's all relationships. There are obviously relationships that should not continue, right? Like, no question, right? I don't want to say this is like the answer for everything. Yeah. But if you're in a situation where it's pretty good and you go together for the right reasons and you have a track record and you know that there's love and respect and shared values, right? If you get to that stage, at that point, to be able to say, okay, what is it that's triggering me? Why am I reacting this way? And the Holy Grail, which I am very far away from, but the Holy Grail is to be able to say at that moment, oh, I can feel something coming up. I'm just going to take 5 minutes before I say anything, right? Which is almost impossible, I think, even if...
Especially in the moment, right? Like, when you feel it in the moment, it's hard to, recognize that this is... I don't want to say wrong, because I think we really should get to a point where we are self-aware, or you realize enough in yourself to know what certain responses aren't right in the moment, or the certain ways you respond to your partner may not necessarily be the way to respond right now. But sometimes things can get so heated that you just latch out, and I think that brings in certain things like you mentioned briefly, but I think it still stands out, like stuff like love languages, right? And I think love languages and intimacy and growth and stuff is very pertinent in relationships. I was never an advocate for love languages in the past, so I don't want to come across and make it seem like this is something that I'm definitely very familiar with. But I would say this: a lot of men that I've had conversation with in recent times in the past will often say something like, this is a very good example because it happened recently. She always wants to to be very affectionate towards me, right? And I don't like that. She always wants to like, you know, do this or doing that, and I don't like that. And it's very, I guess, I don't want to use the term annoying or whatever, but that was like the gist of the conversation, right? And one part of me was like, but what else is she doing? You know, like, is she being annoying in a way that like stops your productivity? No. Is she being annoying in a way that it like stops you from being or makes you feel emasculated in some way? And we could touch on emasculation a little later. No. Is it that, you know, you guys argue a lot after this thing happened? No, it's just not the way that you know. So then it got me to thinking, because love languages don't seem to be a topic or a term that necessarily permeates the space that men find themselves in a lot, right? It's usually like, oh, that's a woman's thing to do, right? So yeah, because
it's like a framework, right, to approach a situation like that.
So what are the love languages, if you know them?
Sure. So a love language, you have a love language how you naturally express your love, and you have a love language how you feel loved,
right?
And it probably all comes to back to our upbringing again. The way I feel loved is through touch. So Bea just needs to put her hand on my shoulder, or we hug each other, and I feel great. I don't need to talk about anything. I don't need to discuss anything, emotions. I don't need presents. I don't need compliments. Nothing like that, right? For Bea, she wants to spend time, but like quality time. So it's not just watching Netflix. It's got to be connecting. For her, it's about connecting, talking about the important things, not just about who's taking the kids to school tomorrow, right? Like really about what happened during the day, and you know, the conversation she had with her best friend, or you know, and how I'm dealing with the stress of my work, whatever the case may be, right? And how we're doing as a couple. That's also very important for her. So that, like I said, I'm kind of avoidant. So for me, that was like a real, oh my word, she wants to talk about us again. Like, do we have to? But the fact was, it's like, I would say the love languages are like, it's like tending the garden. Right? If your relationship is a garden, that's like watering the garden, right? Because otherwise it's going to get dry and things are going to get brittle and you're going to get weeds coming through, right? So the love languages are touch, words of affirmation and compliments, gifts and surprises, right? Quality time. And I'm going to miss the last one. You have them there?
I got the other one. Acts of service.
Acts of service. Yeah. It's just funny actually, because I express my love through acts of service. So I'll be like tidying up the kitchen to the last fork, you know, and everything, or I'll be like taking care of all errands on Saturday morning. But I could do that for 100 years, and Beatrice wouldn't feel any more loved. Yeah. Right? But if I say to her, can we meet for lunch? It's been a while since we connected. Yeah. Like, she's melting in my hands. Right? So I think it's a useful tool.
Because driving, there was a time recently, Jess and I were just driving on the road, and she does this thing where she just asks like these random questions, right? You got you had that time already, like just a random question. What do you think my love language is? I fucking know.
That's her connecting,
right? Yeah. But it starts to bring out to kind of like make you dive deeper into yourself, right? Because as much as I want to pride myself on being self-aware, there's certain things that I'm not very in tune with, right? And it's definitely this love language thing. So I would clean the house spotless, right?
Perfect example.
I would do the gardening outside. I would take her car out. I would clean the car inside and out, right? I would tidy up whatever. I would do all the laundry and stuff so that she can just put her feet up. You don't have to do anything, right? So in my mind, it's like, oh, I do all these things, you know what I mean? But she feels more distant, right? And we had the conversation, and she was, how would you want to be loved? I was like, I don't need touch or anything. And she said exactly, like, you don't need that. This is not the way that you show or feel love, right? And then I started to think back. I think back to childhood and how my parents grew up. And my father, even though we never really had like a great connection, he was definitely always doing things around the house. He would wake up and he would give the house a nice sweep, or he would tidy up in the kitchen, or he'd do all these things on the outside of the house. And it never brought my mother any closer to him, right? I know I experienced, here's the funny thing, or here's the ironic thing, because in life I thought that I needed to be so not what my father was and not what he represented or presented himself as. And then I find myself going back down this line of kind of showing up as how he would show up in relationships in certain aspects.
It's a wonderful thing. Like, I mean, like, it's a wonderful thing. Let's be honest. Wouldn't we all want to be together with someone whose love language is acts of service?
Exactly.
I mean, like,
just do, you know,
shopping's done. You know, I picked up the kids. You know, like,
great, love you forever, right?
But then it's a perfect example. But her love language is she feels love differently, right? So yeah, you got to unlock her love language.
I think it's very important as men, because people say that they want these relationships, right? People say that they want to be together forever, and they want like this love story that stands the test of time, right? Like, I see statuses, and I don't take everything to heart, but it's just so funny to see how people would. I think what we post, especially as times have changed recently, what we post is usually like some identifier of what we feel, right, on the inside, whether that is social media or a WhatsApp story or Instagram story. Is usually reflective of the way that we feel. People don't link it often enough because it's just for fun. But I think the truth comes out in these things, right? And the whole love language thing is not just about knowing, as you said, it's not just about knowing your love language or how you operate, but it's also understanding the partner, how different she may 100%. React to that, right? So I just feel, as you said, it's something that we all have to learn. And you mentioned some other things too, in terms of like avoidant. You said that a lot.
Attachment styles. I think that's another major one. So, by the way, the 5 Love Languages is a book. It's Gary Chapman, I think. Yeah. And you talk about these long-term relationships. One of the nice points the book makes is that love is a verb. Like, we associate love to be a noun, something that happens to us. Right? Yeah. But actually, love is actually showing up every day, right? And it's a great expression. You know, marriage is not 50-50, right? Marriage is both people giving their 100%, right, all the time. Only divorce is 50-50. And that stuck with me, you know, and that's what it feels like. Once you get past the honeymoon stage and, you know, call it the reality of the relationship sinks in, and there's all this mirroring and projection that we do about this person completing us and making us feel whole. When that fades, which is generally after 2 or 3 years, then it becomes a point of like, I'm going to love you by all the things you described, you know, by your joint project, by showing up, by understanding each other better, by building a project together, and that I think is a lifelong journey, right? Or as long as it can last, right? As long as it's good, as long as it works for both people.
It's like you stated it in the beginning, but you said the marriage is like a people growing machine, right? What do you mean by that?
When we were talking a little earlier, I mentioned how we go into a relationship because it feels like this person is making us whole, right? Mm-hmm. And then it turns out that, interestingly, usually it's the thing that attracted you to someone the most that becomes the point that is most frustrating and causes the most annoyance. Now, I have a real-world personal example, because when I met Bea, I was like, wow, she really knows what she wants. She's so clear. Yeah. And she's so good at like setting boundaries, which is something I couldn't do. I was like, oh, whatever you want. I don't mind. Like a little bit like a rudderless ship, right? So I was like, this woman is amazing, right? But it's a classic example. I needed to develop that in myself. So what happened is a couple years down the line, and it was I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years down the line, suddenly I noticed it's like, wow, I've interpreted it as being critical now. Because she was just saying, hey, I like this, I don't like this, which is what was so attractive about her. And now I'm taking it personally, right? I'm like, wow, she's still just expressing what she feels. But then it all started, that's when the grow or separate moment comes, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. It could be 1,000 factors depending on what you grew up with. And that was what it was for me. It's like, okay, so actually, what can I learn from this, right? When the dust is settled, you're not angry, you're in a moment where you can actually reflect and take some time. It's like, well, clearly that's something that I need to learn for myself, like putting boundaries and healthy boundaries, and also being more clear about what I want and not just going along with what everyone else wants because that's the path of least resistance or that's how I keep everyone happy. Like, so it's like a mirror.
Does that change your love language over time, or is it still the same thing, but in a sense that being intimate with this partner now reveals parts of you that maybe needs a bit of work or a bit of healing?
I would say the love languages are like one aspect, but I think this stuff, when I'm talking about the growing, it's like the love languages may be indicators in a way to keep the garden looking fresh.
Yeah.
But this stuff that creates the real friction, the real trigger moments, the real anguish, the real pain, the real anger and hatred, at the moment when it all explodes, I think that goes much, much deeper. And that is the hardest part, because it's the stuff that's in our hard drive. It's the stuff that we have grown up in with all our lives. And actually, it might have been something which helped us a lot. Like someone that's very performance oriented, always has to be the best. It's taken them very far. Yeah. Someone that is avoidant, someone that is people pleasing, someone that is, there's all these characteristics that people have, and it might have worked very well for them, right? And then suddenly they get to the point that it's not working anymore. And that point could come through work. You might have an issue at work where it becomes a conflict or something, or very often it happens in our relationships. And I think it's like Yoda levels of Jedi self-awareness to be able to say, what is the lesson here? Like, why does this keep coming up, right? And for me, it doesn't mean that I have to accept what's happening, right? But exploding or blaming on the person, like you mentioned, is totally ineffective. It's not going to help anyone, right? Whereas if it's about me having to put a boundary, well, I can do it respectfully. I can do it honestly. I can do it vulnerably. Yeah. Like there's many ways that I can express myself, which are not explosive or evasive, avoidant. And I think this goes, in many senses. Like I always felt criticized. Maybe other people feel abandoned. Maybe other people feel like they're having to carry all the load. Yeah. Or maybe other people feel that, they feel very afraid, like something's always going to go wrong. Like, and that is all, I think it's all based on stuff that's happened to us, like you said in the past. But like, okay, can I just look at this objectively now? Like the questions you asked your friend, what is she really asking? Like, did anything really go wrong? Like she's seeking something from you. All right, so that's a very simple thing. Do I want to give the gift to my partner that she's seeking closeness and reassurance, or not? Well, if you're not wanting to go that far, then you probably shouldn't be in a relationship, right? If that's too much effort, right? Yeah. To understand the other person that way. And in the same way, it's like if just like that person has every right to say, listen, I love you. Right now, I just need a couple hours for myself. I'm going to come back. And look, I really want to spend time with you, but can we organize it for tomorrow or 9 p.m., right? Like, that is a way where you're recognizing what the person needs, but you're also recognizing what you need for yourself.
Oftentimes men, I guess, they still want to stick to this particular character, right? Like, I've had countless conversations outside of this podcast and within the podcast where people obviously try to define men, masculinity, what have you. And well, obviously not the guests I've brought on, but what I've seen on the outside is that men typically don't want to express emotion, right? It seems to be like a very male trait. Do you think it's something innate that men feel this way? Because you said when you were growing up, obviously you were like very taking on what you would have seen around you and stuff. So is your view of what being a man has that changed for you now as you've been in a relationship so long? Like, is there any change, or you still feel the same way towards it? Like, is this what a man is supposed to be? A man is supposed to be very stoic, very like
I think there's several elements to this. The first one is that, I mean, at the most fundamental level, I think everyone needs to define for themselves, right, what it means for them. And I think that comes from somewhere deep within that, and it's a lifelong journey, right? I believe becoming authentic to ourselves is a lifelong journey. It never ends, right? It's just trying to get closer and closer to the feeling of like, yeah, this, I feel really comfortable in my own skin now, and etc. The second thing is, so there's not really a universal definition of what it means to be a man. However, I think that traditionally, like, men, through the fact, just history, right? I don't want to go into the whole history of it, but like, we had to build things, fight wars, like, be an economic provider, right? No judgment here, but that's historically what's happened. So over generations, right? I don't think a man had much bandwidth to put it like in exaggerated terms, like fall apart emotionally, right? Suck it up, pull it together. And that was the message that young kids get, right? Yeah. Stop crying, right? Stop crying, because you got to be strong. And you know what? Maybe on the playground, you start shedding a few tears, you're gonna get ribbed, right? You're gonna be bullied and ribbed. So yeah, the message is constantly reinforced. You got to be strong. So what happens, right? Men suppress their emotions. That means it's not like they're feeling it and they just don't express it. It means they even stop feeling it and they lose touch with that. Yeah. And I think that's where the danger is. Now, can a man express his emotions without falling apart? Of course. I mean, how manly and confident is it for someone to say, I just heard you say this and it makes me feel very sad. Right? Now, they're not crying. They're not, creating a drama, but they're just being absolutely authentic, right? Like, I'm feeling very angry right now. Yeah. So I'm going to take 5 minutes for myself, and then I'm going to come back and can we please talk about this? Man, that is someone that you can rely on, right? That is someone that is so centered. They're so grounded in themselves that they're able to express their emotions, but in a calm and safe and respectful way. So I think that's the end game, right? But to get there, we also need to be able to identify our emotions. And I think that is where the struggle is. Personally, I know, like I mentioned, we're leaving Barbados. It's made us very sad. It's made me very sad. But it didn't necessarily always come up as sadness. It came up with a feeling of like frustration, impatience, like I didn't feel right. I was short with the kids. I was short with Bea. And so then you take a moment to reflect. Oh my word, something's going on here. Yeah. Why am I swearing at these people when I'm driving? Like, this is not normal, right? And then you think, okay, what's going on in my life? All right, it's probably, I need to take a time. Another example is like when my parents died, and I just knew it's like, if I don't sit down quietly every day for myself to be able to feel what I need to feel, then I'm just going to be rushing work, kids, family, travel, and I'm just going to skip this whole step, and it's going to come back and bite me. And people even warn me about that. People warn me. It's like one of my biggest regrets is not processing, like when my parents passed, and it came back later in a really bad way. So I actually then took the time every day. I was like, I'm just going to sit 10 or 20 minutes in a chair, put everything away, and just sit. And of course, that gave space, right? It gave space for the emotions to come up. As a man, we want to run away. We want to avoid that, right? But I think that helped me a lot. Just to be able to say, okay, there's a space to grieve now. My own privacy in my home, just to be able to let those emotions go.
Should men do that alone? Reason I ask is because I was recently listening to another podcast with this lady. What was her name? Esther Perel.
Right.
And she mentioned, obviously, for lack of a better term, the need for community. If women, as we know, like something goes up, something's wrong, they run off to maybe like a yoga class or go off to the beach or whatever they need. Maybe I see Jess and Bear, like they're advocates for that, right? You just leave, you get away, you find your tribe, you find a community, and you get through with it. And in recent times, I can speak from experience, and I can speak maybe just from what I'm seeing, right? We mentioned in the beginning, moving into relationships and having to deal with stuff internally. But I guess what I'm really trying to get at is like, does it really have to be that way? Because as Esther was like drawing on or pulling from it, in recent times, it was very common for men to go out in groups. It was very common for men to like have community and just talk about stuff that men deal with, right? And now it seems like we've gone in the opposite direction, whereas spaces like this seem to be very like rare. It's like a rarity. It's like, oh, it's not men don't talk about emotions and men don't do this. But in the past, it was something that men gathered to do. Like they gathered to hunt, they gathered to form tribes, they gathered to like protect, provide for families. And now it seems like this modernized version of man means that I can't do it unless I do it myself. You know, I can't go and find community. I can't go and be a better partner. I can't be a better friend. 100%. I need to find stuff myself. But is it really that we need to do it ourselves, or should we
I think you're touching on a very, very important point, and it's actually, there's research out there that proves it by examining different men and different groups of men, and I think whether they would have a regular meeting with other guys or not, and the differences in like mental health outcomes, I think it was, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, I'm not familiar with the study, but I'm sure you could find it online. And the conclusion was that men should be getting together amongst men at least twice a week, right? And not necessarily also, to your point, we're going to get together to do something like watch sports or whatever, but actually get together to talk and hang out. Now, does that mean that everyone has to examine their lives in the group and go do some soul searching and ask each other like great coaching questions?
Yeah.
I don't think so at all. I think the dynamic of just having guys together, people will vent through humor. People will just have a chat on the side. People will, like, there will be the opportunity where I certainly miss it. Like, I get, thankfully, a lot of like sense of community and connection through sports, but it's still not the same as when I've been out with a bunch of guys, even if it's for one beer or two beers, just to have that moment when I'm not a dad, I'm not a husband, I'm not an employee, I'm not, you know, the person in the community, whatever my responsibilities are. I can just be me and kind of let it all hang out. And I think that's so fundamental. And I think we do have to get it ourselves. Like, no one's going to do it for us, right? And not make it too heavy either. I think it's just literally about hanging out. And we're trying to be very good fathers. We're trying to be very good partners. We're trying to be, you know, further our professional careers, our vocations, our mission. So how much time is there left over? And yet, I think it's fundamental. I think it's fundamental to men's mental health just to be able to have that space to unwind and just, like you say, what was absolutely the norm for hundreds of thousands of years, right, has now become an exception, especially in that phase when you have young kids, right? And I think probably it gets easier as your kids get a bit older.
When it comes to relationships as well, does understanding or identifying, should I say, the way that you feel emotionally is that also linked with identifying what possibly could sabotage this intimacy or this relationship with the partner? I find I want to use an example to explain what I mean. There's some, verbal disagreements and stuff that me and Jess may have, right? And there are a lot of times where she might just say to me, like, this is how I feel or whatever, and I also say to her, but this is how I feel and stuff. And like at points you think that is communicating, and communication, like I communicate how I feel to you, you communicate how you feel to me, and then communication brings the relationship together. But then sometimes in the communicating we realize that we don't feel any closer than when we first.
I would say empathy will bring the relationship together. So communication is the foundation, but I think the rest of it has to be built on being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes. So if Bae is telling me how her day is, and I'm hearing, and I'm and I'm not really thinking about how it was for her, I'm not really putting myself in that empathy, then I think she's not going to feel connected, right? So then maybe that's the dynamic that's happening. That, well, I feel angry right now. Well, I feel angry too. Okay, did we connect? No, we didn't connect. No, the moment that, like, the Holy Grail would be like, I can understand. I can hear you say that when I said that, you were late and I found that was, disrespectful, whatever, or it was very difficult for me and stressful, that the way I expressed myself was rude because I swore and I raised my voice, and I shouldn't have done that. Wow, that feels very different, right?
Yeah.
Like, because now I'm literally talking from their perspective, right? And if the other person can do the same, man, that's it. You built the two sides of the bridge, and you're going to meet in the middle, right? So, like, there's a great tool, actually. It's called nonviolent communication, and I recommend anyone, if they can get their hands on it, just to read the book. It's very easy to read, full of great examples. And basically, it's like the way that you express what you observe, how it made you feel, and then I think there's 4 steps, but I think it's like, this is what I felt, and I feel. You express your emotion, and then you make a request, right? And what a difference between a demand or a criticism and a request. Like, I came home and I noticed that all the clothes were over the floor. This made me feel, there's only 4 emotions, right? Angry, sad, afraid, and happy, right? This made me feel angry, but this made me feel sad because I felt like I'd been ignored by what I'd been asked. My request to you is, could you not leave the clothes on the ground, right? Now, I might be like, well, I don't care about the clothes. But it's very hard to disagree with that, right? It's just literally a request, right? And plus the person's shown what it did to them. So, like, that's kind of the Holy Grail when it comes to, I think, communication, but connecting in the process. And maybe the other person can say, well, I hear what you say. Today I had a really, like, I've just been running around after the kids for the last 4 hours, like, whatever. Our kid fell over, he scratched his knee. I had to deal with it. So that's why the clothes are on the floor, right? Wow. All right. Okay, fine. It's kind of an idealized situation, but you can see the difference with what I would be an explosive reaction, which is like, what? You've just been out and now you're telling me that, like, that's the trigger.
So, a very cliche question, I find, because recent father, right? So it's like, it's still very new for me. But how can you, I guess, like, balance work and life and relationship and being a father and all that? And no traveling, it's like, it just seems like so much, right? And then you have been together for 20 years and, like I said, I've seen experiences, I've seen real life examples of people, like, when having to go through all these things and still not end up like trying to stick it or be together. Like, how do you balance that?
I struggle with it a lot. I think this is modern life where we want to really be present in our children's lives, which is a wonderful thing. And of course, it's going to benefit that child forever, literally forever, because of that feeling of security and emotional security that they have from having, being close to the parents. I constantly struggled with guilt, because if I was doing something for myself, then the voice in my head would be saying like, yeah, but you should be doing this with one of your kids. Right. You should be taking care of that. I struggle with exhaustion because I work hard, and then I want to do my sports, and then I want to be there for the kids. I'm going to be there for Bea, and I just tired myself out. So I'm not really a good person to ask. I would say what's changed is that we used to grow up in communities where the kids would be kind of much more raised by a broader group of people, right? Aunties or neighbors, and remember how little supervision kids used to have, right? Now, I think what's happened is that with the modernization of society, the families become much more isolated, and now it's just a couple trying to do it all, whilst also trying to have their professional careers, and whilst also having to, take care of a relationship, which is meant to be an everything relationship, right? Like, think about the difference between the cliche relationship from the 1950s, where one partner, traditionally the wife, would be just taking care of the house and working, and I don't know what, like, that's changed radically. And
do you think that that's like a global issue, or do you think that, because obviously I know you can't speak to everything that happens in Barbados, but you did spend a lot of time in Barbados, and you said you're originally from Netherlands and you grew up, and you spent a lot of time, in England as well. Do you think what you're seeing now in terms of parenting and the modernization of parenting, or whatever the case may be, is it more, or is there a big difference, I guess, in terms of what happens in Europe and what happens in Barbados?
I just think that the Anglo-Saxon form of capitalism is not benefiting most people. Right. And that is the fact that we are expected to give more and more and more, and always be available and always be present. Whereas, and that there's a good thing, obviously, but like the women are having stellar careers and doing fantastic, but all that puts pressure, right? Where is there flexibility in the system? And then we lost the fact that maybe in Barbados, I hear a lot of people, they talk about their grandma and how they were raised by their grandma, or their grandma took care of them. Now, I think that is something which where I grew up, everyone kind of moves away, right, after university or even before university, and then you never have any support, or very little support network. So you're really doing it as the family unit, with both parents working, with demanding professional careers, and because you need to earn that money to be able to get by nowadays, right? So I'm blaming Anglo-Saxon capitalism, but like, you take the Dutch model, which is much more kind of based around social safety nets and kind of left-leaning egalitarian society, higher taxes on rich people, and taking care of vulnerable. And people are moving towards a 4-day week. They did it in Iceland as well. What does that mean? Now you have both people in the couple will work 4 days. So now already have both 2 days a week. Someone's available to take the care of the kids or pick them up from creche or whatever it is at 3:00, right? Without any stress about having to balance that with work and your meetings and your conference calls and that thing, or wherever you're earning your money. Then maybe grandma will be available, or granddad will be available for 1 day a week. Now the kid's only in the creche 2 days a week, right? So like, that for me is a model which is like, well, we're actually finally prioritizing what is important to us over what is important to some shareholder boss that wants just to make more money off of my back. So I'm kind of revealing a little bit my political leanings here as well. But like, I think this is where, a healthy functioning society should prioritize the well-being of the family and make it possible for the parents to be able to raise those kids, because that is going to feed into society after that, right? And you see it in Denmark, you see it in Sweden, you see it in Norway, you see it in Finland, and Iceland has just officially moved to a 4-day work week. Well,
obviously not trying to get too political and stuff, but these countries also have the economy to back something like that happening, right? I think one of the biggest things that I've discussed recently with my partner is that it seems so common especially in Barbados, for women to be back out to work like almost immediately after they've had children, right? And you don't really get enough time to do that. And as two working parents, and with all these weird hours that we would work, you really need the first couple of years home with each other so you can actually have, right? I see things happen in Sweden and Denmark and all these things, and even recently she was talking about, I believe it was either China or Japan, who enforced some law around maternity leave and stuff like that. We don't have the same economic structure here to provide stuff like that. Obviously, what we do have as parents is the way that we can raise the children. That being said, like, how are you raising your sons differently to the way that you were brought up? Yeah.
So first, on the first point, I totally understand that point, that it's the level of the economy in like Western Europe with the tax base, and the fact that things work quite efficiently and people can be very productive, etc. Like all of that generates wealth, right? For the economy. And you're right. So it does. But there's the other side of it is that the people that are working 4 days a week, they're still working a full week. They're just doing it over 4 days, right? It's like a 36 or a 40-hour week. They're just doing it over 4 days, which gives them the flexibility for the 5th day, right? So in some sense, it's also how you organize things. Like, it could be 1,000 examples, but I think what the key point is that the society and the companies and the government were able to have that conversation and say, all right, what makes the most sense now? Let's make it policy, right? Where they were able to make that change and have that kind of dialogue. And I think that is maybe where, like they mentioned here about staggering the school opening hours, right? To avoid traffic. Maybe, who knows what impact. It might save people an hour a day. Yeah. But imagine an hour a day that you can spend with your kids instead of sitting in traffic, right? That would be a game changer, right? That's a significant proportion. So it's like that sort of, there's that aspect as well where it's just, I guess change is always hard, of course. And then the other aspect about Barbados, I don't know to what extent, where you still do have family that can help, right? Like the grandparents that can take care of the kids or pick them up from school. For me, that was the most stressful part of the day, is making sure my kids could get home on time, and then obviously balancing their activities and what was happening the weekend with what was still our social life, and gratefully so, and the sports and activities I want to do for myself. So like hopefully there is also solutions around, if it's a neighbor or carpooling or I don't know. I'm trying to think creatively here. For my upbringing, like I mentioned, like there was not much closeness and not much warmth, and my dad was actually away most of the time. So I'm just trying to be very present for my kids, like absolutely, which is just obviously the right thing to do, but then that also comes that sense of guilt and, am I doing enough? Am I being present enough for them? And I think every parent has that. I honestly think every parent you want the best for your kid, as you know, right? You do literally anything for them, right? So then when you're not doing something for them, it's just like, well, should I be doing something for them, right? Yeah. And I don't have the answer for that. I'm sure, like, the answer is don't sweat it. Like, like the kids are probably more resilient than we think. Yeah. And they probably just need like a good example. So what's the best thing you can give your kid is to model the behavior you want. Like my kids they use the worst swear words. Now there's only one place they got that from. I can blame the movies and everything, but it's because they sat in the car with me and they heard me, like, so what am I modeling? That's what they pick up. And I think that's maybe the most fundamental thing. I had to learn, I learned enough from my dad that I knew I wanted to be present and not be kind of like the absent father. So that was where he taught me without realizing that he was teaching me, right? So there's that way of learning. But the other way is also just the subconscious modeling that we get, where, like you mentioned, your dad was also always tidying up the house. Like my mom was always tidying up the house. So that's how I'm tidying up the house. So that's like that model we give. And that can also be about the way we respond in times of conflict and how we, organize ourselves and the way we speak our truth, right? Or stand up for our values. Like there's 1,000 things that the kids are just watching. They're not doing what we're saying, right? Yeah. They're literally just soaking it up, right? From when they're born, like, okay, is this person got a calm presence? Do they have a stressed presence? Are they, you know, like that's all that stuff goes in very deep. So I don't know. It's really impossible. I suspect that I've swung too far the other way. So like I'm probably too permissive with my kids, and that will have its consequences. You know, like, so there is, I know I can be explosive because I let it slide, and then suddenly I just lose my temper. Like, so all of that, I'm modeling stuff, which is not ideal, right? But, you know, you talk about self-awareness, and I think that's kind of the crux of it, right? It's like, there's always a part of us that is not the anger, that is not the overthinking, that is not the fear, that is not even the happiness. There's always a part of us which is like, can be observed it, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's, if we are able to access that kind of steady part of us, which ultimately, I mean, I say it's not happiness, but ultimately it carries a sense of peace, right? When we're in touch with it. I think from that place, we can always make a wise choice, right? And that is really the struggle, because life is busy, and, you know, 1,000 things going on, and 1,000 demands of our time, and feelings of responsibility and having to provide, etc. To be able to step back and say, like, am I living true to myself? Am I feeling in balance? Right? It's all the aspects of our life that we need to keep in balance. You know, why does this conflict keep coming up? Right? One thing for sure about relationships is that the same thing is going to keep coming up. They'll just have like slightly different flavors, right? But it's going to keep coming up. The same kind of dynamic, the same tension, same source of friction, you know, like to be able to reflect on that. You know, actually being present with the kids. I suspect there's a lot of, I mean, they say it, right? It's like, what was smoking maybe 30 years ago, 40 years ago, is now become like screens, right? Like I think, with the pressures that parents are under, it's very hard to keep an eye on what your kids are doing. And then maybe they're stuck at home because it's not safe to go outside anymore. You can't ride bikes because they could get run over. Like all this stuff that pushes us to, and of course the phones and screens are very addictive. I think that's another big element where, you know, we'll find out in the next 10 or 20 years, you know, what's going to happen with that. Ultimately, speaking about parenting, I think kids are pretty resilient. I think kids need good role models, obviously, and it's what we do that's going to have the biggest impact. But also, like, they could probably get by with, it's not like we need to smother them or be those helicopter parents or be worried about everything we say. Like, I've seen my kids, they're pretty smart, they're pretty self-aware, and they're pretty resilient. What they do need is a hug, or like a non-judgmental listening ear when they've had a tough day.
So how do you help your sons navigate emotions?
So there's some great guidance out there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book called How to Talk So Your Kids Will Listen, and Listen So Your Kids Will Talk. And as parents, we always feel like we need to solve something or correct something, right? So the kid comes home, and there's some great examples. It'll be like, Mrs. Babcock is stupid, right? And the parent will say, you can't call your teacher stupid, right? Or, you know, like something, right? Correcting the kid. Effectively, the message is, whatever you're feeling right now, I don't recognize it. I'm telling you shouldn't be feeling it, right? So that's kind of like a bad example, which we all do thousands of times, right? All the time. So the advice is that basically the best response is usually like, right? Or to reflect, like literally just and just give the space for the kid, right? Or to ask, like, you know, the open question, like, or to reflect back, like, oh, you seem to be angry at Mrs. Babcock, right? Or you're angry at Mrs. Babcock. So the kid is like, yeah, I'm feeling angry, right? And then the kid might say something like, yeah, she gave me a detention, right? And it's like, oh, okay, again, what? You got a detention? You know, the normal response would be, that's the 5th time. You know, I told you had to improve your behavior. Blah, blah, blah. Again, the kid's being told you shouldn't be feeling what you should be feeling, right? Whatever happened to you, whatever your truth is right now, doesn't matter, because I'm telling you should be a different way, right? You're not using those words, but that's the message the kid is getting. But then the advice would be, oh, that sounds really tough, right? Now the kid's like, oh, this is different, right?
Yeah.
It looks like I'm actually, and then the next layer will come up, right? Naturally, because like first the anger, and then, the sadness is up. And then it's like, oh, that sounds really tough. Or, or do you, tell me what happened. And then the kid might tell the story that, Jeremy pushed me in the playground today, but when I came in the classroom, I pushed him back and I got detention. It's so unfair, right? Okay. Wow. So something's going on with Jeremy. So, okay, what's going on with Jeremy? It turns out, who knows what's happening, right? It's just an example. But the fact is that if we'd shut the kid down the first time or the second time, we'd never found out that he's having a conflict at school. Maybe there's some bullying. Maybe it's just Jeremy's being stupid. Or maybe like something really serious happened. But, the kid doesn't feel able to or feel safe for all the reasons we discussed to come home and say, like this happened today and I feel really bad about it. The kid, because they're trying to learn how to express their emotions, is Mrs. Babcock's stupid.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the game we can play. That's the role we can play as parents. Yeah. It's just to create that space where the kid feels absolutely safe to be able to express, even if they say things which are inappropriate.
Yeah.
You can discuss that later, right? But to feel absolutely safe for those emotions to come out and then help them label it. Oh, that must have felt really bad. I can see you're angry. Wow, that must have felt really unfair.
Yeah.
Now the kid is like, yeah, that felt unfair. And they're learning to unpack all that storm inside and actually identify what's actually going on underneath them. I think that's the best thing we can do as parents. And certainly that's what it says like in the books I've read that are like, that have been inspiring.
It's very common in Caribbean culture, right? To be very dismissive of children's feelings. Like, I'm the parent, I'm the adult, you're a child, right? And I think some people try to navigate it, but also understanding that we're still human, right? We're still human and we're going to react in the way that humans do. And I guess what I'm learning, especially now with Jess's son, is like, growing up, it wasn't always the easiest thing to try to come and explain or see stuff that happened at school or whatever and think that there's no consequence to what you would have done, right? Something always precedes the action. Like, you did something wrong, you need to have like a punishment for it. I know, like, in becoming a father, in understanding her son, there, as you said, layers to all these things. And he would often come home and he would say things like, just something random or something that would have happened at school. But sometimes, well, in earlier times, I would have been reactive to it. Not reactive to be violent, but reactive in being very stern and angry and upset because it does something to me, right? It's past trauma that I've had to deal with that it's like, you are not allowed to be out of place or rude or disrespectful to those older than you. Not understanding that he's still navigating emotions as a 4 or 5 year old toddler. So we may see it as disrespect, but he really doesn't understand what the term disrespectful means. He just knows that this is how I feel and this is what I need to get out. And then when he comes home and he says stuff like, I remember one particular conversation, I don't remember exactly what it was about, but it would follow with, Dwayne, I don't want you to be mad, or I hope you're not upset.
Kid was saying that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So now, like, you start to look internally, right? It's like, I don't want, obviously we know this thing, he's not my son, but at the end of the day, I'm still a role, as you call it, it's a male role model in his life. I don't want him growing up with his brother and they come home and they're afraid to even share something with me just because of the reaction that they may receive, right? I want to be able to talk it out with them. And then going back to all the stuff that we had to talk about in terms of like relationships, it's not very comfortable, right? It's not a very comfortable place to be in, having a relationship with somebody else, because that person is not you, right? You can't have a relationship and not, I guess, not go through all these like changing emotions, whether that's with a child, whether that's with another same sex, or whether that's the opposite sex, or whoever. It's impossible to have relationships and like everything just goes smooth when you understand that this is a part of growth, like growing as a person, but then growing as a partner, growing as a father. And it's like, as we discussed, it's like constantly like evolving all the time. So I definitely agree with that. It's like, I don't want to be dismissive towards their feelings, and I need to like grow out of the old way of thinking or the old model I had before to try to show up in a way for these kids. And it's hard, man. It's really hard to do it, but
I think it's important to differentiate between the values that you want to uphold,
right,
and the way that they're communicated, right? And I think the values that you're trying to uphold are absolutely valid.
Yeah, because I don't want them to be disrespectful.
Absolutely.
I don't want them to.
My word, kids need boundaries.
Yeah.
Like, the kids that go off the rails are the ones that usually, I've seen kids that obviously are absent parents, or parents that were just always working and not taking care of them, and maybe, just trying to just pay for stuff so they wouldn't, but also too permissive parenting. Like, I don't think that a child necessarily has the mental maturity for, like, there has to be, I think boundaries and clear expectations are fundamental to thriving kids, right? That's how they feel safe. If there's no boundaries, they're going to try and look for them. And how are they going to look for them?
Just push them.
They're going to keep looking for them by breaking stuff and going more and more wild, because what they're really looking for is a boundary makes them feel safe, and that obviously makes them feel loved, and like they're in a place where they can thrive. It's like the difference between if you put a kid in the middle of the jungle and say, hey, go and explore what you want, or you put them in a playground and say, you can do anything you want, but that's the fence, okay? And within that, within that fence, right? And there's things that, and that's so important, and that's something which I don't think I got entirely right with my own kids. Yeah. There's something, the difference between authoritative and authoritarian, right?
Yes.
So, like, I think it's very healthy to tell a kid no, right? The answer is no, and it's not gonna change, right? The kid's gonna try and change your mind, but like, if you stay with no, then first of all, you're modeling strength, and and secondly, the kid is like, okay, I can rely on this person, right? Like, this person is clear about what they want and what the expectations are, and then you can talk obviously about if those expectations are not being met. But so I wouldn't just say it's hold on to the values, but like, I think you already gave yourself the answer. It's about, if the kid is being disrespectful at school, then that obviously needs to be dealt with. Yeah. But at the time that he's unloading, it's probably not the time you want to deal with it, right? You probably want to talk. It's like any relationship, the same thing. Like, the time that I'm having a conflict with Bea is not the time that we need to start digging into our childhood wounds and our triggers, right? No, that's the moment where we need to take some space, or try and mirror and understand what the other person is saying, to be able to get that empathy and that connection. And then you can do the corrective action later, and it will be much more effective, right? Much more effective.
What is one thing you think every man should maybe reflect on before stepping into a relationship?
Well, like a serious relationship, you mean? Like, or making a commitment?
Yeah, I think I'm at an age now where relationships need to, I mean, I can't see the future where I don't know if everything's gonna last. But I think at this age now, I definitely don't want like something just blowing in the wind, I think it comes in age, especially with the self-awareness. Maybe it's a blessing and a curse that you need a bit more structure in your life, right? And like, I've seen and gone through like a lot of relationships, and I've seen other peers or whatever go through relationships too, and to some extent some people still find themselves in the same in the same thing. And you talked about therapy during stuff. I've been in therapy before my relationship with Jess and throughout my relationship with Jess, and one thing my therapist said to us is that people wait until it's too late, like you wait until the ship is sailed in this relationship to try to like get into therapy and try to like pull it back in when you two are already going separate ways. You've come into the relationship knowing that you're two different people. You've come into the relationship knowing that you've had two different upbringings, right? This is the best time to introduce it. And as I said in previous episodes, this isn't to tell people that they need therapy, right? I can't tell somebody that they need or they don't, right? But based on somebody who's been in a relationship or a marriage as long as you have, I understand the intricacies of therapy and what that does. Like, what do you think men should do?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think there's two questions men should ask themselves. And first of all, I think therapy is just a tool in your toolbox, whereas there's many tools you can use, right? Like, I think what is very powerful is if you journal, right? If you can take 10 minutes a day, just to literally, maybe there's lots of journaling questions you can look up online, or just write something that you're grateful for, or something that made you upset. There's like a thing about, you know, what went well today, what could have gone better, and what am I going to try and do differently tomorrow. That kind of reflection is all like part of the growth process, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be with a professional therapist. But which touches on your question, you know, what should a man ask themselves before they go into a relationship, a serious relationship, is the first question would be, am I doing this from a place of lack, or am I doing it from a place of fullness? Like, do I want to be there with this person because something is missing in my life? Or am I actually okay and I want this person to add to my life? Because if you're in the first situation, you're going to rely on that person to try and solve something for you, and it's not going to work. Right. But if you can say, okay, yes, of course I want to be with someone. I want to share my life. I'm feeling lonely, or I'm, you know, fed up being myself, whatever. Like, it's all valid, right? But I know I'm okay, right? But I want this person to add value to my life. Now you're going in much more free. And hopefully the other person would have asked themselves the same question too, right? It takes two to tango, right? And now you're going in a place where it's like, okay, let's, you know, it's like you have a garden, but now you're going to plant some more flowers in it, right? You're adding something to something which is already kind of well maintained, right? You're not expecting them to build the garden for you, right? So that's the first question. And the second question, I think, touches on the point what you mentioned about therapy, is that making it more general, I would say the question you need to ask yourself is, am I willing to do the work? When this will inevitably get into a situation of shittiness, right? When it gets to the point where we're triggering each other, or when we're just too tired, or we're arguing and it's the same argument, am I willing to do the work? And again, you got to hope the other person is also willing, right? Has also asked themselves that question, right? Because, you know, one person can do a lot of work, but at some point they're going to say, look, I'm willing to grow. You're only blaming me. So, you know, thanks very much, but let's go our own ways. But if both of you can honestly say, okay, at the moment when it's the worst moment, when I'm so angry and so upset and so hurt, am I still able then to ask, what did I contribute to this situation? Then you're away. That's it. That's the golden ticket, right? And then you just got to keep rinse and repeat, right? For as long as you can go.
So bringing it to a close soon, I think it was a great conversation. But what would you say is the best advice you got when it comes to love and relationships? It may not be advice that somebody spoke to you. It could be something you read in a book or whatever. Like, what would you say is the best?
Well, there's a great book called The 4 Agreements.
Right.
I recommend it to anyone. It's very small. You can probably find it online. It's compact. And the first recommendation, the first agreement that you need to make with yourself is never take anything personal. If you can never take anything, it sounds insane, but whatever is happening, whatever this person is saying to you, it could be at work, it could be in traffic, it could be in your relationship, which we were discussing, right? It could be the way your kids are treating you. It could be never take anything personally, because ultimately it's always about the other person's own stuff, right? How you react, that's your choice. You can say no thank you, you can say let's change this, or we need to work on this. I'm not saying that you shouldn't put boundaries or whatever, right? But never take it personally. That would be the golden key. Imagine the difference in my explosiveness, if at the moment that I want to raise my voice and get angry, that I can remember, oh wait, this is not about me, right? Right? Or maybe, you know, and then you could get that space inside your mind and emotions to be able to say, you know, maybe I'm misinterpreting this, or maybe I'm, you know, but it's not like, if I'm taking it personally, then I'm already going down the rabbit hole.
There's definitely like a next level of selflessness, right? You come into the relationship and you think that you're selfless until something stirs the pot again, and now all of a sudden you become selfish, right? I can't have a conversation with you because I'm so angry. But so often when Jess and I have a conversation and we actually sit down to have a communicate about it, and we really get down to the nitty gritty, we realize that whatever perception she had about whatever the situation I was upset about is completely different to the perception that I had about the exact same situation. She was like, that's totally not what I was thinking. I was like, it's not what I was thinking either. So now here we are going like these separate directions, having like this whole, you know, perceptive reality of whatever the situation was. But neither of us are on the same page when it comes to like what was actually wrong, right? So it's like, had I not taken it so personally, as you said, or had I not been so affected by this, then I could just come to you and say, well, oh, this offended me.
Yeah.
Say, that offended me. I apologize. Yeah. Oh, cool.
No. I didn't mean it like that.
I didn't mean it like that.
Yeah. Oh, good. Okay. I'm sorry. I misinterpreted. I misheard you or whatever. I didn't mean, you know? It'll be magic. It's the Holy Grail. It's the Holy Grail, you know?
It's constant work. It's constant effort.
Yeah. Right. And I think probably the healthiest couples will even get to the stage where they approach it with humor.
Yeah.
You know, where they give so much confidence, and they, you know, that they recognize the pattern, that they can even tease each other about it, and again, not take it personally, right? Like that would be, you know, at that stage, you know that you've mastered your emotions, you've mastered your emotional responses. It's going to be a lifelong journey, right?
Yeah, I just want to end it here and just like thank you for coming on. I know you didn't realize that we were gonna be, so I don't want to say candid, but I think that the conversation flowed today, even though we were so like anxious about how it was gonna play out, and understanding that you know, relationships is just, as you put it earlier, it's like a mirror, right? You hold up the mirror, you can see your strengths, you can see your scars, and just overall, like this well-oiled machine that you talked about, it helps us grow. And if we are brave enough, we can get a turn to like look inward and see, well, this is where I fall down, and the other person too. And this is how I choose to move forward, you know, in love and keep and continue to grow. I think it was very insightful today. I really think it was a great conversation. I thank you for coming. And I also wish you a safe flight. I'm not sure if we're going to see you again before.
Well, let's make sure we do.
Yeah.
We'll see each other on the beach.
On a beach or something.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
It's been my pleasure.
Conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And all the best. I wish you every success with this podcast and what you're doing, the work you're doing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I just want to give a shout out to the guy that approached me on the beach. I don't know your name, and every time somebody mentions Breadfruit, I always think fitness. But this guy came to me and he said to keep doing my thing on the podcast, and it really was inspiring to him. When I started the podcast, I wasn't really sure who this was going to reach, and I would always say something along the lines of, you know, if you think it isn't for you, then it isn't, but then again, maybe it is. And I think for those people that think that this is something for them, I hope you can get something for these conversations. I hope the conversations continue to inspire you guys, and you continue to listen, and we can build a space and build a community that men can feel safe to express emotions like these and feel vulnerable in this space and not feel attacked by showing emotion. Thanks for listening.